I opened my heart, vulnerable and raw, only to be told I was broken. Not enough. Toxic. That one word shattered everything: my marriage, my trust, my identity. And she said it without flinching. My name is Armin. I'm 37 years old, and until a few months ago, I thought I was a good husband. Maybe not perfect, but loyal, hardworking, present. I thought that mattered. I thought love was built on what you do, what you give, what you sacrifice. But that illusion crumbled the day my wife Sarah looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You need to do the work on your toxic masculinity." At first, I didn't even react. I blinked, stared at her, confused. I thought maybe she was quoting something from one of those Instagram therapists she follows. But no, she meant me. My masculinity. Toxic. That word hit like a sucker punch to the gut. I wasn't abusive. I didn't yell. I never laid a hand on her. I didn't cheat. I never even so much as flirted with anyone else in all our 10 years together. But apparently, according to her, that didn't matter anymore. I was emotionally unavailable, controlling in subtle ways, and worst of all, I was incapable of true vulnerability. She said it like a diagnosis. Cold. Clinical. Like she'd been waiting to say it. What made it worse was how calm she was. Like she'd rehearsed it. Like she'd already decided the verdict and was just letting me in on the news. "Do the work, Armin," she repeated. "This isn't just about us. This is about how you've been socialized your whole life. You were raised to suppress emotions, to dominate, to expect submission. And I'm done carrying that burden." I should have been angry, but instead, I felt naked. Like she'd peeled back layers of me I didn't even know existed. And for a terrifying second, I wondered if she was right. But then I remembered who I was. I grew up in a house where men didn't cry, because crying meant weakness. Where you were taught to protect, provide, lead. I watched my father work himself to the bone for us. He wasn't affectionate, but he was present. And I vowed to be even more for my future wife. I promised myself that my woman would never feel alone or unsupported. And yet, somehow, here we were. Sarah and I met in grad school. She was fiery and passionate, always challenging professors, pushing discussions into uncomfortable but necessary spaces. I admired her. She challenged me too, and I loved that about her. She made me want to be better. In the early years, we were inseparable. Nights spent talking about social justice, books, our future kids, how we'd raise them to be kind and conscious. We built dreams together. But somewhere along the way, those dreams started to fracture. It started small. She'd sigh when I interrupted her during a store, not intentionally, just out of habit. Then she'd snap, "Let me finish," with irritation. When I bought her a surprise weekend getaway, she smiled tightly and said, "You could have asked me what I needed instead of assuming." I was baffled. I thought I was being romantic. It wasn't long before everything I did was interpreted through a lens of power imbalance. If I took charge during planning, I was controlling. If I stayed quiet during arguments, I was stonewalling. If I cried, it was manipulative. If I didn't cry, it was emotionally unavailable. There was no winning. I started doubting myself constantly, second-guessing every word, every gesture. I stopped initiating conversations, stopped planning things. I became a passive version of myself, afraid of triggering her disappointment. And that's when she said it. Toxic masculinity. The words echoed for days. I Googled articles, watched videos, listened to podcasts. I was desperate to understand what she meant. And what I found was a flood of voices, some validating her, others attacking men altogether. I didn't know who to believe. But one night, I stumbled across a Reddit thread where a man described his wife saying the same thing. He talked about how it eroded his sense of self, how everything he did was reframed as inherently flawed. How, eventually, she admitted that she no longer saw him as a man, but as a symbol of everything wrong with the world. That post broke me, because I realized something I hadn't been able to say out loud. I wasn't being seen anymore. I was being judged not as Armin, but as a walking representation of the patriarchy. It didn't matter what I did, because the frame was already set. And in that frame, I could only ever be the problem. I decided to confront Sarah. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the silence between us thick like fog. I told her I wanted to talk, not argue, just talk. "I need to ask," I began. "When you look at me now, do you still see me? Or do you see everything you hate about men?" She didn't answer at first, just looked down at her hands. Then she whispered, "I don't know." That hurt more than if she'd said no. I nodded slowly. I told her I was willing to work on myself, to unlearn. But I needed to feel like there was still love between us, not just judgment. She started crying, said she did love me, but she felt like she'd been carrying the emotional weight of the relationship for years. That I didn't open up, that I avoided hard conversations, that I always tried to fix instead of feel. I listened. And in that moment, I felt both seen and unseen. Because yes, I had been closed off at times. Yes, I avoided confrontation. But it wasn't because I wanted to dominate. It was because I was terrified of not being enough, of failing her, of being weak in her eyes. I told her that, and for the first time in a long time, she reached for my hand. I thought maybe, just maybe, we were turning a corner. But then, a week later, I found a journal entry she left open on our shared laptop. I wasn't snooping. It popped up as I opened a tab, and what I read made my stomach drop. Sometimes I wonder if I'm in love with the version of him I thought he'd become. He wants credit for listening, for not yelling. That's the bare minimum. I feel like I'm parenting a grown man. I couldn't breathe. She didn't see me as a partner. She saw me as less than, as a project, a failed one. I didn't confront her about it. I couldn't. Something inside me snapped. I started sleeping in the guest room, claiming work stress. I buried myself in deadlines, meetings, late-night emails, anything to avoid going home. One evening, she walked in and asked, "Are you giving up?" I looked at her, exhausted. "Are you still trying?" I asked back. She didn't reply. She just walked away. I knew then that we were living in emotional limbo. Two people stuck in the same house, breathing the same air, but worlds apart. And it all came back to that moment, that sentence, that word, toxic. It's not just a word. It's a label, a cage, a way of saying you're the problem without room for complexity. And the saddest part, I started to believe it. There's something insidious about being labeled toxic, especially by the one person you built your entire adult life around. It seeps into your bloodstream, infects your confidence, corrodes your sense of identity. You begin to see yourself the way they see you. That's what started happening to me. I began shrinking in every room I entered at work, with friends, even alone. I started analyzing every past argument I ever had with Sarah, or with anyone. Was I controlling? Was I dismissive? Was I some kind of villain and didn't know it? One day, I went to lunch with my younger sister, Iman. She was one of the few people I still felt safe with. She looked at me, concerned, and said, "You look tired. Not just physically, like spiritually drained." And without even thinking, I said, "Sarah thinks I'm toxic." Iman dropped her fork. "What?" I nodded. Told her everything what Sarah had said, the journal entry, how I felt like I was living in someone else's script. Iman leaned back, stunned. "Armin, that's not okay. You've always been a gentle soul. You've always tried to do the right thing. But maybe I failed." I muttered. Maybe I didn't know how to be the man she needed. Iman didn't mince words. Or maybe she stopped wanting you and needed a reason to justify it. That hit me hard, because deep down, I already suspected the same thing. That night, I stayed out late, drove around the city aimlessly, trying to remember who I was before I became a problem to fix. I thought about our early days, the way Sarah used to look at me like I was her anchor, her safe place. How did we go from that to this? I started therapy the following week, on my own. I didn't tell Sarah at first. The therapist, a middle-aged man named Kamal, was warm, honest, and didn't coddle me. I told him everything. My upbringing, my relationship, the accusations, the doubts, the journal entry. He listened quietly, then asked a question I'll never forget. "Do you want to fix this because you believe you've truly done harm, or because you're afraid of being abandoned?" The answer terrified me. I wasn't sure anymore. I had internalized so much blame, so much shame, that I no longer knew what I believed. My moral compass had been replaced by her voice. And that's when I realized I hadn't just been silenced. I'd been rewritten. When I finally told Sarah I was seeing a therapist, she looked unimpressed. "Oh, good," she said flatly. "It's about time." That was it. No hug, no encouragement, no warmth. I should have expected that. But it still hurt. I kept going. Every week, digging through years of emotional patterns, unspoken pain, learned behaviors. I learned that yes, I had walls. But those walls weren't built to dominate, they were built to survive. To protect myself from disappointment, ridicule, vulnerability. And slowly, I started rebuilding. My confidence didn't come back in a flood. It returned in small pieces. I started journaling, reading again, reaching out to friends I'd withdrawn from. Most importantly, I stopped tiptoeing around Sarah's moods. That's when the real shift happened. She didn't like it. When I pushed back gently on one of her comments, something about how I never supported her career, she snapped. You're getting defensive again. No, I said calmly. I'm just correcting something that isn't true. I've always supported your career. Her face twisted. This is why I can't talk to you. But I didn't chase her down that time. I let her walk away. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. Because the truth is, I had supported her. I sacrificed so much to make sure she could go after her dreams. I'd worked overtime so she could pursue her nonprofit work. I'd cooked, cleaned, handled bills, all without complaint. But none of it ever seemed to count. None of it was emotional. Enough. Soon after, Iman invited me to spend a weekend with her and her husband in the mountains. I told Sarah. She blinked, surprised. You never do anything on your own, she said. I'm changing, I replied. She didn't answer. That trip was a turning point. Iman's husband, Kareem, pulled me aside one evening while we were sitting on the porch. Look, he said, I don't want to interfere, but I watched you get smaller over the years. Quieter, duller. That's not you. And if she's making you believe that you're broken, you might need to ask yourself what she gains from that. I stared at him. What do you mean? I mean some people need to feel morally superior, and the easiest way to do that is by standing next to someone they've convinced themselves is beneath them. Doesn't mean it's true. That conversation echoed in my mind for days. And when I got back home, something was different. Sarah seemed cold, distant, like she'd made some internal decision she wasn't ready to share. I asked if something was wrong. She paused. I think we've grown in different directions. I nodded slowly. I think so too. She was quiet, then added, but I don't know if that means we should give up. And there it was, hope. A flicker of it. But I didn't reach for it this time. I let it sit. Maybe, I said softly, we should both figure out what we actually want, not what we think we're supposed to want. She didn't argue. The next few weeks were quiet. I went to therapy. She met with her friends. We avoided real conversations, skimming the surface like strangers, pretending everything was fine. Then one day, I came home early and found her crying on the kitchen floor. I froze. Are you okay? She looked up at me, face wet, eyes red. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. I've been angry for so long. And I don't even know if it was really at you. That was the most vulnerable thing she'd said in years. I sat next to her in silence. No fixing, no advice, just presence. And in that stillness, something cracked open between us, a truth too heavy to ignore. We had both become victims of unspoken pain. We had both projected, both punished, both withheld grace, but we had different wounds. Mine was fear of inadequacy. Hers was fear of being erased. And instead of healing together, we had slowly bled out separately. Later that night, I finally said the words neither of us wanted to admit. I don't think we're good for each other anymore. She nodded, eyes filled with tears. I know. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet, like the end of a long song you don't realize has ended until the silence wraps around you. We agreed to separate. No screaming, no blaming. Just the shared grief of two people who had loved each other deeply, but lost the map to each other's hearts. In the weeks that followed, I moved into a small apartment not far from my job. It was lonely at first, empty, but it was mine. I kept going to therapy. I kept on learning. I kept growing, not to prove anything to Sarah or anyone else but for me. And somewhere along the way, I stopped hearing her voice in my head. I started hearing mine, the one that had been drowned out, questioned, labeled. The one that said, you are not toxic. You are human. There's a strange kind of silence that follows heartbreak, not the loud, sobbing kind, but the quiet, aching kind. The one that wraps around your chest when you wake up and reach for someone who's no longer there. That's the silence I woke up to every morning in my new apartment. But over time, that silence became something else. Space to think. Space to feel. Space to finally breathe. I'd been so consumed by trying to prove I wasn't a monster, a manipulator, a product of some dark male archetype, that I never asked the real question, who am I when no one is telling me who I'm supposed to be? The first few weeks of living alone were the hardest. Not because I missed Sarah, although part of me did, but because I missed who I used to be. Before I started viewing myself as some broken thing to be fixed. The hardest part wasn't being alone. It was learning to enjoy my own company again. I stopped looking at myself through her lens. I stopped waiting for validation from a woman who had long since stopped offering it. And somewhere between morning coffee and late-night journal entries, I started building a relationship with myself, something I never really had before. One night, a close friend, Zayn, came over with a six-pack and a concerned look. "You're really out here doing the emotional work, huh?" he said, half-dash joking. I laughed. "Yeah." Finally, he got quiet, then asked, "Can I be honest? Always? I think you were in a relationship where you weren't allowed to be human. You were either toxic or perfect, and there was no room for the in-between. That's not love. That's emotional surveillance." His words hit me hard, because that's exactly what it had felt like, being watched, monitored, judged, as if my existence had to meet a political or emotional standard I didn't agree to, and every deviation was a failure. I don't say that to villainize Sarah. She's not evil. She's not some manipulator who set out to break me. She's a woman with her own wounds, her own beliefs, her own pain. And maybe, just maybe, she started to view me less like a person and more like a concept. But here's the truth I've finally accepted. No one deserves to be reduced to a concept. Not me. Not her. No one. Therapy became the most honest hour of my week. Kimmel pushed me. Held up mirrors I didn't want to look into. We talked about my father, how his silence taught me that masculinity meant stoicism. We talked about the moments I'd shut down with Sarah, not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid that showing too much would make me look weak. And then, one day, Kimmel asked something I didn't expect. "You forgive her?" I stared at him. The question echoed. Did I? "I don't know," I said. "Do you want to?" I paused. "Yes, but not for her, for me." And so I did. Not all at once. Not with some dramatic breakthrough. But little by little. I forgave the nights she weaponized my silence. I forgave the journal entries that stripped away my humanity. I even forgave the label toxic masculinity because I understood where it came from. And in forgiving her, I let go of the version of myself that constantly needed to be perfect to be loved. A few months later, I ran into her at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. It was awkward, of course. The kind of awkward that makes your skin feel too tight. But we hugged. Polite, distant. She looked different, lighter, maybe. Or just resigned. We talked briefly, catching up. Work, family, surface stuff. Then she said, "You seem grounded." "Different. I am," I replied. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good. I'm glad." There was nothing more to say, and that was okay, because I didn't need her approval anymore. That night, walking back to my apartment, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Not happiness. Not victory. Not closure. Just peace. And that peace stayed. A few weeks after that, I started speaking at a men's support group, just once at first, then twice, then regularly. It wasn't a place for complaining or blaming. It was a place for unpacking, for confronting the ways we were raised, the pressures we felt, the emotional illiteracy many of us had inherited. And it was beautiful. Men crying openly, owning their flaws without shame, supporting each other through breakups, fatherhood, grief. I shared my story, not as a victim, not as a hero, just as someone who had survived being misunderstood. I remember one young guy, maybe 25, coming up to me after a session. He said, "Thank you. I didn't know you could be masculine and still talk about pain like that." I smiled. You can be human and still talk about pain like that. That's when I realized this wasn't just recovery. This was rebirth. A year passed. One evening, Hyman called me, laughing about something her toddler had done. And in the middle of the conversation, she suddenly said, "I just want to say, I'm proud of you for..." "What?" "For not letting someone else's idea of you become your identity." That stayed with me, because I almost did. I almost let the person who once loved me most convince me that I was a problem to be solved, instead of a person to be known. But not anymore. I wasn't perfect. I had things to work on, still do. But I no longer carried the burden of shame for things I never did. I was finally free. One day, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Sarah. My hands shook a little as I opened it. "Armin, I don't know if this will ever reach you, but I needed to write it anyway. I've been in therapy too, and I've come to understand some things I couldn't see before. You didn't deserve to be labeled the way I labeled you. You were never abusive, never cruel. You were just a man trying his best in a world that didn't give you tools. And instead of helping you build, I broke you down. I projected my pain onto you and called it justice. But it wasn't. It was fear, masked as empowerment. I'm sorry. I hope you're well. I hope you're happy. I hope you're loved for exactly who you are." Sarai sat with the letter for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just let it settle. because I didn't need the apology anymore. But it was still healing to receive it. I didn't write back. Sometimes the most powerful closure is silence, the kind you choose, not the kind that's forced upon you. Today, I'm in a new relationship. It's early. It's fragile, but it's honest. She doesn't expect perfection. She expects presence. She doesn't need me to be a walking apology. She just wants me to be real. And for the first time in a long time, I am. I still catch myself second-guessing things sometimes. Old patterns die hard, but I'm aware now. Conscious. Open. Because I've learned that being a man isn't about power. It's not about dominance. It's not even about protection. It's about truth. And sometimes, the hardest truth is that the person you love might not be capable of loving you in the way you need. That doesn't make you toxic. That makes you human.